Hey, like so many Sunday mornings, I am absolutely scrambling to get connected with you today. So glad to be uh, finding my way into Facebook Live this morning. Hopefully, you're starting to come on board and to connect to this conversation that we're going to have this morning. Um, as we get rolling, I just wanted to do a couple things. One is to welcome you to this space. Obviously, many of us come here live to this place and want to feel like we're connected to each other. And I was struck the other day that during this time of pandemic, when we're so isolated from each other, I think we've forgotten how beautiful, how deep, how engaging, how sacred everybody is. Because we're so focused in our own journey that we just forget to be in conversation or to lean into the kind of the depth of relationship that we used to foster in everyday conversations and maybe even took for granted. And I say that because just the other night we had a kind of a little cocktail party with another couple, and just hearing their story and the way in which they're navigating their life and making decisions and trying to do the right thing. It just simply reminded me how deep and beautiful every life is, and that coming together, even digitally like this, is just a way to remember that and to be drawn into the life of another, if but for 15 or 20 minutes. It's going to be a short one today. Together on a Sunday morning, and then to kind of remember and hold on to those connections throughout the week. So that's my Sunday morning preamble for today. I am a little bit where I'm at and a little bit of technical news for you today. For some reason, and that's why I'm scrambling, I'm unable to get my Ethernet cable to plug into this unit. So I'm dependent on the wireless system in my house. And that is always a little bit volatile. So if everything goes, not to hell, but if everything falls apart, that's what happened. And my apologies in the preamble to that. The second one is I position myself. I've got you today on my bar. So as you come into my house, I have a little bar where I hold all my cocktail mixing stuff. That's here. I can just show you. So here's my shaker. You're on the bar, but behind me is since my son is a baker, I have a series of photographs that we have in the house that show kind of the way in which production happens from the moment of mixing ingredients, working the ingredients, spending time letting those ingredients sort of come to maturity, and then ultimately baking the bread. And I wanted to do this particular morning in front of those photos because I really, I really think we're all kind of not struggling, but working hard to kind of gather the ingredients. And these days, the ingredients seem very hard to work with. We're gathering ingredients, we're kneading those ingredients, and we're hoping that we might produce something that is of value, not only for us, but for the world as well. In my mind, it's a deep kind of experience that mirrors the experience behind me. And today I want to invite us into kind of a two-step process. One is this week to try to explore one kind of way in which we can work those ingredients. What's something that we can learn from our own spiritual or religious tradition, even the religious traditions of others, to kind of engage in that material in a meaningful way. And then next week, I want to talk about kind of a more activist component to that. So this week's just sort of like, how do we knead the bread, right? And then next week is how do we bake something that's going to be of nourishment for us and for the world. And to prepare for next week, I'm doing an interview this week with someone who I think can help us understand that more deeply. So and if I'm lucky, I might be able to have her do a kind of a co-piece as we gather together next week as well. Okay? So If you're just catching up, that's what we're doing today. If you're just logging on now, you're going to have to replay this and figure out what I just talked about. If you're, of course, joining us not live, but sometime during the week, let's just jump into this thing together. I'm going to have you do an exercise this morning to using the chat feature on Facebook. So you do want to, if you can anyway, the exercise for this morning is going to be using that chat feature. So I'm going to invite you into that. And to set that up, I just wanted to talk a little bit about a lot of the conversations that I've been having and the conversation that I have with myself, which is ongoing, is sort of filled with a level of heightened anxiety these days, right? I talk to a lot of people having trouble sleeping. They are extending their cocktail hour to navigate all of the complexity of the cultural issues, the environmental issues, the health issues that we face. The weight of those just seems to be building up to the point where, and this is why I wanted to have this conversation with you today, to the point where it almost feels like, any little event can turn into a kind of a tipping point and kind of push you over the cliff a bit, right? To where now you're really feeling the weight of this thing, or the heaviness of it, or the anxiety of it. I'll give you an example. I was talking to somebody about some of the environmental degradation that's going on, and I am personally anxious about that in general. And then some of the new news by researchers around kind of how far we've come and how difficult it's going to be to pull back from sort of the global environmental crisis that we're confronting and the implications of that, just caused me so much anxiety that one night I wouldn't call it an anxiety attack, but I was just really having an internal panic attack and trying to calm myself down. And I don't think I'm alone. The more people I talk to are manifesting some physiological responses to the sort of the strain of these times. And so there's these, I think because we're under so much kind of cultural strain globally, that things like the Breonna Taylor decision, right, that I don't think was, caused a lot of grief for good reason, because there was no conviction around the killing of Breonna Taylor, all of a sudden becomes a trigger moment, and it just sends you a little deeper into the trauma. The replacement process for RBG can be a trigger moment to send you deeper into the trauma. So I guess what I want to do is to say, okay, how could we, given all these ingredients that we're having to navigate, how could we deal with them in a healthy way that might allow us to find ways, and this is another thing that I hear, to make a difference or to generate something, to produce something that is going to be more wholesome. Okay, so that's the challenge. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to, rather than a meditative piece today, I want you to pause for a moment, and I want you to type this into the chat today, but I don't want you to push send yet. Okay, so you understand what I'm talking about? So we're going to send it all at the same time. And I did it on a sticky note because I'm not on a computer. I'm on just a screen. So what you're going to think about is, I just want you to capture for a moment sort of that which is weighing on you right now. Like if you were to pick, like, what's the kind of thing that feels a little bit like a trigger for you right now? Think about the news, think about your engagement with, maybe it's work or family, environment, the politics, the health issues, whatever it is. I want you to start kind of say, what is hot enough? What is the key ingredient, maybe if I'm sticking with the theme, for you right now that feels like it's like a trigger thing? Like if that goes down poorly, I'm really going to snap, right? And type it in the chat. Be a little vulnerable. Type it in the chat, but don't send it yet. All right. So I'm going to give you I'll look at my watch. I'll give you like 30 seconds to type that up. Pause. I'll stop talking, pause, and let you do that while I look at my notes because I'm hardly prepared for today as usual. All right. So take a minute to do that. Take another few seconds to type something up. There's only about 30 of us online right now, from what I can tell. So if we can even get 15 or 20 of these on the screen at once, that would be awesome. All right. So for those of you who just joined, you're typing into the chat what you think right now for you is sort of the most volatile kind of trigger that you're paying attention to. And if things go, south on that thing, it's going to cause you some internal or maybe even external kind of disruption. Okay, so everybody did it. All right. This is an attempt to use to use this media to do something kind of fun. All right, go ahead and hit send, and let's just see what happens. Hopefully, we'll get a little bit of a shot at what you came up with, and then you'll get to see also what other people are kind of experiencing. And we just want to hold that content for a bit and allow it to kind of inform the way we feel and experience others and experience it ourselves. So thanks. I see them popping up. Oh, yeah, these are great. Yeah. Oh, yes. I'm so glad to be able to read these because I know we're all in the same boat. It's what's ironic is actually reading over some of these that you're bringing up is already triggering some heightened anxiety on my part, and they're not even mine. Yes, thank you. So I want you to, for those of you who did this experiment, first of all, thank you. I mean, I think it's important for us to realize that these are the triggers right now, and there's a lot of them. I want to kind of frame these triggers with an old experience I had years ago, and then move us into, move us a little bit into the way in which these triggers have kind of created a social fabric that I think puts us all on edge and is sometimes bringing out the worst of us collectively and maybe even some of the worst of us internally and what we might be able to do about it, guided by, I think, some of the insights that religions have always brought to a journey like this. Okay? So when I was a teenager, one of the first things that I integrated into my transportation life was not just a bicycle, but a motorcycle. Our family was, I think most of us all rode motorcycles when we were younger. And when you're younger, you drive a motorcycle like, you have no fear, right? So you do drive them a little aggressively. And I'll never forget the moment when I realized that this might not be a good idea to ride a motorcycle. Now, some of you might be motorcycle riders and keep doing it. And I'm sure you're enjoying it. But if you're a motorcycle rider, there's one thing you know, and that is the center of the lane is there's a slippery stain in the center of the lane. That is to be a metaphor, right? It's a motorcycle metaphor. The center of the lane often has a slippery stain. And what that slippery stain is that you realize as someone who rides a motorcycle is as cars go down the road, they seep oil as they drive. And that oil is obviously situated in the center of the lane because that's where your engine is on your car. Over time, with all that traffic, the center of the lane, particularly on a little bit of a rainy day, can be a very dangerous place. Because you're on two wheels, as you come around a curve, if you engage that center part of the lane, there can be trouble. So I was coming home. I think I was coming home from work. It was late at night. I was driving my motorcycle too fast. Maybe there was some dew in the air, and somebody was kind of pushing me. So we were both going a little bit too fast. And I was coming off a 280 onto old Highway 17 to head towards Los Gatos. And I'm on my motorcycle, and I'm probably driving above the speed limit. And I remember as I hit this turn, I was on track on the inside of the lane where I'm supposed to be, but I couldn't maintain that. And I felt, that moment feels very much like the moment right now, right? That I couldn't, even though I knew the track I wanted to maintain, things were going so fast. I was driving so fast that the centrifugal force of the speed of the tempo was driving me into that slippery stain. And I remember as I was taking the corner, and I can almost, because it was so traumatic, I can almost feel it now. It felt much like what I feel like today, in that I couldn't maintain the path I was on because of the rate of speed, and I was being pushed into dangerous territory. And this is getting exciting. I'm still alive, so this didn't happen. But so as I moved to the center of the lane now, not out of my own, I knew the danger of that center lane. So I didn't want to be there, but I could not resist. I was being pulled into it against my will, but by the behaviors of the pace that I had been keeping up. And I hit that slippery stain in the middle of the road, and my wheels started slipping out from underneath me. And I could tell in that moment I was about ready to lose control of the bike. And then that was not going to be good. So as I'm in that moment, and those of you who have experienced sort of these life-threatening moments, like time slowed down. It is weird, isn't it? I had this moment of pause, realizing what had happened and realizing that everything from this moment on wasn't going to be pretty. It was like a tipping point moment that I found myself in due to pace, due to sort of just the physics of transportation, right? And because of the stain in the road, which is, I think, many of us are experiencing right now, right? And in that moment, I don't think there was panic, but I realized there was space in that moment for pause. And then in an instant, I crossed past the stain and got to the other edge of the outside of the lane. And the bike magically, and I think it was magically, kind of righted itself. And I was safe and on my way home. And I came down and did the speed limit from there on forward. I use that metaphor because I think maybe for those of you who had experiences like that, we realize that there's these moments when there are conditions that we don't have total control over, but we've set up based on the style or pace of our life experience that we're going to run into and we're going to have to navigate. And the risk is definitely there of us experiencing pain or crash or disruption. But certainly in that moment of transition through those, like all the stuff that you've put onto the screen today, there is this moment of pause. I do think there is this moment, this space that opens up. And my question to you today, and this is just what I want to reflect on today, is what do you do in that space? What do you do in that space? And if you think about what you're kind of anticipating as a trigger for you, as you engage in that, in the trajectory of your own path, what will you do with some space that will be possible for you as it becomes, the trigger becomes almost like a dominant force in your life. Okay? All right. That's how I set that up. Now, here's the thing. None of us are alone in this. I don't know about you, but Lori and I watch David Brooks and Mark Shields whenever they're on. They were just on the other night, and both of them were talking about, and I've never heard particularly David Brooks talk about this, but he and his colleagues are definitely filled with a level of like fear and anxiety and worry like they've never experienced before. Both with the election cycle, like many of you are nervous about, the way in which it's being framed by the current administration and the media and circumstances that is creating a kind of energy around this election that feels unprecedented. They are feeling that feels to them like the slippery stain in the middle of our road that we've traveled on over and over again every 4 years as we go through an election cycle. So you can feel the kind of the metaphor, the motorcycle metaphor at work here. The same is true with the results of the Breonna Taylor killing. Poor woman takes in bed, sleeping, takes 8 shots to the body by the people who are supposed to be protecting society. And then the results of that just rock a community that expected a different kind of outcome when it came to how to deal with the police officers who engaged in this behavior. I, too, was shaken by that, and I don't think that story's over. But you layer that on top of the long pathway of racial inequities throughout our history, systemic and structural racism that people have been coping with. And then you get another trigger moment in that. And you can just feel the weight of that in a community of people of color. And as white people, it should be a weight we bear as well, of course. So these are real experiences along the path of life that are coming our way over and over again. The fires, I think, are another one. We're all worried now. We've got another couple of days with the fire alert. Communities that have already experienced fire during fire season and now the threat to their life and livelihood again. The weight of that is just almost feels unbearable. So what do we do? I think that and you can find this in almost any religion, I think, but if we look to our religious tradition about how have people navigated such moments of realization that while they know there's volatility along the path, as they feel their life trajectory entering into that space, how do they deal with it? And I am struck, and I think you could look at almost any of particularly the Hebrew scriptures. If you look at the psalmist, if you look at the book of Job, if you look at the prophetic voices in the texts, and if you look at the way in even which Jesus, I'm going to make a reference to him a little bit later, the way in which Jesus engages this, there's often in this pause, this moment where you're entering into this, a kind of call to maybe you think about it as naming or lifting up or looking more deeply, thus the idea of revelation or revealing that we talked about in past weeks, pulling back the curtain a bit to understand more deeply and find language for that understanding that is lifted up. That before, in a sense, and so look at the psalmist, all those psalms that cry out around the condition of humanity or the condition of the nations or the violence that experienced from between nations. And that that's not just experienced, but it is languaged, it's expressed, it's lifted up, it's shared, it's somehow given a face or an identity. And that happens again and again. The same with the book of Job. If you look at the book of Job, right, Job experiences an experience that is just simply counter to his life trajectory. He hits that skid in the road. He feels like his bike is slipping out from underneath him. And for the rest of that book, until the very end, it's an expression of what the heck is going on here. Let's pull this back and understand it more deeply, look more fully at what this experience is really like before we figure out how to move forward. Again and again, you find in both prophetic voices, in the book of Psalms, in Job and other writings in religious texts, this understanding that in that moment of pause is a moment to look more deeply into what's really going on. What's really going on for you, finding the words to claim it, name it, what's really going on in the culture as far as you can understand it, trying to find language for it so that you build a relationship with it that has some depth and meaning. That is part of the religious journey. And in a sense, it's a prerequisite for finding the way forward, right? You can't just go, you can't. Art and Strasser used to have this great thing, there's no way through it except through it. You can't just go past it. You can't just hope it's going to go away. Those things actually don't work. You have to actually enter into it at some deep level. And to have the kind of religious and spiritual, what would you call it, like chutzpah, capacity, investment to be able to do that is really part of the call of what it means to be a religious person. That religion is not just about accepting the quick fix or wanting to escape the situation. It's actually entering into it in a meaningful way, to tend to this space that we have in a way that allows you to pay attention. Let me give you one example of it in the life of Jesus that I think is interesting. There's a story in, I think it's in a lot of the Gospels, but I know it's in Mark's Gospel. Jesus runs into someone who's possessed with a demon. So the demon has attached itself to this individual. And so the individual is embodying the demon, okay? And the expression of that demonic possession is that the man is stuck in a graveyard out of control. So he's like, the individual is manifesting and expressing all of the symptoms of being possessed by the demon. And everybody looks at the man and says, I don't want anything to do with the man. I mean, the man is going crazy, right? The man, if you look at the man, you could almost say, what's wrong with him? Right? That's what's going on in the story. And as Jesus approaches the man, he doesn't talk. This is interesting. He doesn't talk to the man who's giving expression to the symptoms. Jesus engages the demons themselves. And so he talks past the man. He sees through the man who's giving expression to the symptomatic results of being possessed by the demon. And he says, who are you inside? What's going on underneath the symptoms, the panic attacks, the worry, the sleeplessness? Hopefully you're paying attention to all this. He's looking beneath the surface to try to understand what's going on for the man inside. What is the demon inside the man that's giving expression to all of these symptoms, right? And this is a beautiful part. And the demons get in a conversation with him, and Jesus calls out the demons and he says, I know who you are. And he gives them a name. He says, you are legion. You are legion. And my guess is in that moment, if it really happened, I don't know if it happened or if it's just Mark's way of trying to help you understand the way in which Jesus thought, but the crowds would have just gasped, because legion is representative of all the Roman legions that have occupied the land and are actually imposing a forceful expression of peace onto the people. In fact, the people who are there to maintain the peace, they're the problem. And people know that, they get that, but no one would ever speak it out loud, right? They become legion. The military presence becomes the demon, not the man. And in this capacity to see kind of behind the man, behind the symptoms, into the cause, is part of the religious journey. And when that's lifted up, then the demon leaves the man's body. I think this, I don't know how you do this, but I think this is a call to religious people to say, don't just look at the symptoms, but spend time paying attention in a meaningful way to what's going on behind the scenes, trying to understand it more deeply, and name it, claim it, lift it up so we know what we're talking about here before we move to a solution. One more example, and then I'll wrap up for today. There's a number of us that are part of a racial justice activation circle that we launched at church in conjunction with other people in the synod. So there's a number of circles that are operating right now, and I'm part of one. They're sort of closed because they're confidential circles. So we launched them, and now they're operational. So you can't, if you're interested, you can't get on now. But if we do it again, you can jump in later. But the whole point of it is to try to look at, particularly from a white perspective, what is systemic racism? What is structural or institutionalized racism? How do we internalize it? It's just literally not trying to say immediately, I want to go make this problem go away or contribute to the cause in a way that might bring about some resolution, but to just spend some time really understanding or naming or identifying what's really going on when we're talking about historic racism. And while you might not always agree with all the material that you read in this experience, what it does is it begins to just invite you into that sort of naming process, right? So that you begin to understand more fully the dynamics of the situation before you begin to give expression in ways that might somehow create a better future. In some ways, so we're using, I think, critical race theory, something that the current administration doesn't like, but we're looking critically at the role of race throughout American history in particular, and of course in other cultures as well. I bring that up because I remember after going to seminary and then being a pastor of a congregation, many of you are part of that congregation, having to think critically about sacred texts was the same sort of challenge, right? You can't just look at sacred texts for their face value. You do have to bring critical thinking to those texts. And as you do, as you begin to look at them more deeply, there's certain, the power they had over you, those texts had over you, when in your pre-critical thinking begins to fade and they take on a new kind of energy, or you understand them in a new, completely kind of new way. And while the transition always feels like the wheels are slipping out from underneath you and you're losing your capacity to drive this, the religious vehicle you've been driving for a long time down the road, you do feel the vehicle slipping out from underneath you. You do regain a trajectory on the other side of that after you've spent time critically looking at it. And even though that moment is often filled with fear, anxiety, nervousness, a lot of questioning, There is something about trusting yourself to the process of paying attention deeply enough so that a new path might emerge on the other side of the lane. God, I am working this metaphor so crazy. I don't know if you can all hang on to this. So that's what I'm trying to help you to kind of think about today, right? You find a new part of the lane on which you're to journey. And I want to end with that because I think that if you look at Taoism, Confucianism, Zen Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, every religion is about what we're talking about right now. Kind of showing you life from a particular perspective so that you might find a new way. Right? So religion is so critical for this moment in time. All the stuff on that list, religion is there to help you have the confidence to be able to move into that space in a meaningful way. Embrace it, understand it, invite spirit or God or sacred or life to journey with you into that transition, and then have an expectation that, you might fall, but you also might find your way to the other side of the lane, a new way forward. The gospel study on Mark that we do every, Wednesday 11:30. In that study, we're literally at the midpoint of Mark's gospel. And Mark's gospel, for the first half of Mark's gospel, Jesus is constantly getting in a boat and going from one shoreline to another shoreline, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then he's engaging his public in a way that's helping them kind of frame what his ministry is all about. And at the midpoint, there's a phrase that's introduced into Mark's gospel that now is dominant for the second half. And that phrase is on the way. On the way. It shows up magically at the midpoint. And Mark, the gospel writer, uses it to say, okay, once you've understood what I'm trying to help you to see about the situation that you're in, now we can journey on the way. And this second half is all about how do we then live our lives on in the other part of the lane, right? On the other side of that slippery stain that we now can name and claim and understand more deeply. That is what it means to be a religious person, to not just be stuck, to just not give in to panic, but to fully be engaged in a way that allows us to be transformed. That's my hope for you, that no matter what you typed in, maybe in the next week ahead, before I leap to the next part 2 of this, which I think is going to give you some tools about, what might be possible in that other pathway. Before we get there, this is a good week to say, take 10 minutes every day and either read, do a little research, talk to your neighbors, just explore more deeply to understand the character of the nature of the thing that is your trigger. And just to see if that helps you move in a more meaningful way through it into some new way of participating, so that you might produce something that's nourishing, something that's fulfilling, something that's life-giving on the other side of needing those ingredients. All right, that's it. Amen to that. I listen to myself when I do these things, and I'm like, I don't know if you guys can follow, or no, guys, you all can follow what I'm talking about, because sometimes, I'm creating it as I go. I too am trying to impose the same kind of religious perspective on my own journey as well. So I'm not like ahead of you. I'm with you. I'm in real time on this. It's not like I've got this figured out and I'm trying to drag you with me. I literally am in the same boat, riding the same bike that you are. down the road and feeling, like I'm getting pulled into the trigger point. So let's see what we can do together, shall we? A few announcements today as we hopefully spend some time reflecting. Obviously, I posted up some music. You could kind of take a pause with that music and kind of let some of this content sink in as you read through some of the material today. Picked one of Martin's pieces for today. Also, we sent, for those of you who are part of the community, we sent you a letter in the mail with all of our digital programming that's coming up. And one of the ones that I wanted to make sure and highlight today, which was just launched this week, I've been spending most of my week working on, was our new podcast series called Soul Forum. Soul Forum. And while you can access it through, I think, Facebook and some other links, it will be in the iTunes library soon. And then whatever you use to listen to podcasts, you'll be able to link to that podcast. And the first series is with a gal who's kind of looking at how do we explore, both understand where digital expressions of religion came from, how they're taking shape during this experience of pandemic, and what they might offer as we move out of pandemic into the future. And so our first PhD student has got a 3-part series about that. And then the second person is working on his about civic engagement, particularly as we jump into election time. What does that all mean for us? So some really, I think, interesting material. It is, presented by PhDs, so it can be sometimes a little bit technical, but I think it's helpful. It's helpful to kind of frame what we're experiencing through the lens of people who are looking critically at what we're experiencing. So Soul Forum, see if you can link to that and start paying attention to that. And of course, letting us know if you have questions for the speakers. I am also going to put together a Zoom Q&A session with each of the speakers. So if you want to be a part of that, shoot me some questions using soulforum@oslc.net, and I'll make sure if you got a good question, I might link you into that. What else did I want to talk about? Oh, a shout out to Carl and Craig in confirmation. They're doing a hybrid model of confirmation. The kids are getting together today and doing a project safely distanced from each other. So really happy for that. Also to Cheryl, who's launching the teen ministry peer-to-peer program. That's going to be launched in the next couple of weeks. So if you have a teenager, now's the time to get them connected to Cheryl so they could be part of the initial leadership team that does that. So make sure you make that happen. And then on Thursday, I believe, we'll be mailing out the next Ubuntu door banner project for our kids in conjunction with a project called Community Matters. So you'll see about that in Thursdays this week as well. I think that's all I've got for you today. With that, hunker down. We're into a little bit of a couple days of maybe bad air and bad heat, but we'll get our way through it. Use the time if you're stuck in the house, maybe just, like Jesus, staring in the face of that which is your trigger and going, who are you really? What kind of effect are you having inside of me? I want to attend to that so I know you a little bit better. And in my capacity to name you, to claim you, to understand you, I will find my way to a new path forward that might produce both some nourishment for my soul and for the world's soul as well. All right, all. Have a great Sunday.